At least they had once Swan Sanche had finished her inspection of the boats and decided they were river-worthy. Barely. Each vessel carried a single shielded lantern. Gowan could barely make out the other boats sliding over the ebony water, the soldiers rowing them in near silence as they pulled up beside the stonework embankment on Tarvalin's southwestern side. The flashes of light in the sky were distracting, and Gowan kept finding himself glancing up to see serpentine beasts illuminated briefly by cold white lightning or blazing crimson fire. The white tower itself seemed to burn. It lit a daunting profile in the sky, all white and red, outlined by flames. Smoke boiled toward the midnight clouds above, fires blazed inside many tower windows, and a glare at the base indicated that outlying buildings and trees were also alight. The soldiers shipped oars as Gowan's boat gracefully slid up beside that of Bryn, passing under the lip of ancient stonework where rock overhung the river. That blocked Gowan's view of the furious battle, though he could still hear the rumblings and pops, and an occasional spray of broken stone falling to the cobbles, sounding like distant rain. Gowan raised his lantern, risking just a sliver of light from the shield. With that illumination, he could make out what Bryn's soldier had seen. Tarvalin's island was rimmed by ogier-made bulwarks, part of the original city design. They kept the island from eroding. Like most ogier work, the bulwarks were beautiful. Here, the stone delicately arched outward from the island 5 or 6 feet above the water, forming a lip that looked like the white tip of a crashing wave. In the soft light of Gowan's lantern, the undersides of those stones were so realistic, so delicate, that it was difficult to tell where stone ended and river began. One of those stone ripples hit a cleft, almost impossible to spot even from this close at hand. Bryn's soldiers were steering his boat into the narrow rift, which was enclosed on both sides and topped by stone. Swan's boat went next, and Gowan waved for his rowers to go after her. The rift turned into a very narrow channel, and Gowan unshielded his lantern further as Bryn and Swan had done ahead. The lichen-covered stones were ribboned on the sides by dark watermarks. In many years, this passage would have been completely underwater. It was probably designed for workers, Bryn said from up ahead, his soft voice echoing in the damp tunnel. Even the movements of the oars in the water were amplified, as were distant drips and lappings of the river. To go out and maintain the stonework. I don't care why they built it, Swan said. I'm just glad it's here, and mortified I didn't know about it earlier. One of the strengths of Tarvalin has always been that the bridges make it secure. You can keep track of who goes in and who goes out. Bryn snorted softly, the sound echoing down the tunnel. You can never control everything in a city this size, Swan. Those bridges, in a way, they give you a false sense of control. Sure, for an invading army, this city is impenetrable. But a place like this, tighter than a tick, can still have a dozen holes big enough for fleas to slip through. Swan fell silent. Gowan calmed himself, breathing steadily. At least he was finally doing something to help Egwene. It had taken far longer than he'd wanted. Light said that he was coming soon enough. The tunnel trembled from a distant explosion. Gowan glanced over his shoulder at the other 10 boats, packed with apprehensive soldiers. They were gliding directly into a war zone where both sides were stronger than they were, both sides had little reason to like them, and both sides were wielding the one power. It took a special kind of man to stare those odds in the eyes. Here, Bryn said, silhouetted against the light. He raised a hand and halted the line of boats. The tunnel had opened up to the right, where a ledge of stone, a landing with a set of stairs, waited. The watery tunnel itself continued on. Bryn stood, bending over, and stepped out onto the ledge, mooring his boat to a cleat. The soldiers in his boat followed, each carrying a small brown package. What were they? Gowan hadn't noticed them loading the packages on the boats. When the final soldier in that boat stepped out, he pushed the vessel forward and handed its tow rope to a soldier in Swan's boat. As the line continued forward, they tied each boat to the one ahead of it. The last man would secure his boat to the docking pillar, and it would hold them all in place. Gowan stepped onto the stone ledge when his turn came, and he trotted up the steps, which opened into the floor of a small alley. This entrance had probably long since been forgotten by all, save the few beggars who used it for shelter. Several of the soldiers were tying up a small group of such men at the back of the alleyway. Gowan grimaced but said nothing. More often than not, beggars would sell secrets to any who cared to listen, and news of 100 soldiers sneaking into the city would be worth good coin from the tower guard. Bryn stood with Swan at the mouth of the alleyway, checking the street outside. Gowan joined them, hand on his sword. The streets were empty, the people no doubt hid in their homes, likely praying that the raid would soon pass. The soldiers gathered in the alley. Bryn quietly ordered a squad of 10 to guard the boats. Then the rest opened the soft-looking brown packages that Gowan had noticed earlier and removed folded white tabards. They pulled these over their heads, tying them at the waist. Each was marked with the flame of Tarvalon. Gowan whistled softly, though Swan stood with arms akimbo, looking indignant. "Where did you get those?" "I had the women in the outer camp make them," Bryn said. "It's always a good idea to have a few copies of your enemy's uniform." "It's not proper," Swan said, folding her arms. "Serving on the tower guard is a sacred duty. They're your enemy, Swan," Bryn said sternly. "For now, at least. You're not Omelin anymore." She eyed him, but held her tongue. Bryn looked over the soldiers, then nodded in approval. "This won't fool anyone up close, but from a distance it will serve. Out onto the streets and fall into ranks. Hustle toward the tower, as if you're rushing to help with the battle. Swan, a globe of light or two would help with the disguise. If those who see us also see an Aes Sedai at our head, they'll be more likely to assume what we want them to." She sniffed, but did as requested, creating 2 globes of light, then setting them to float in the air beside her head. Bryn gave the command, and the entire group spilled out of the alley and formed ranks. Gowan, Swan, and Bryn took up positions at the front, Gowan and the general walking just ahead of Swan as if they were warders, and they double-timed forward down the street. All in all, the illusion was very good. On first glance, Gowan himself would have bought the disguise. What would be more natural to see than a squadron of tower guard marching to the scene of the attack, guided by an Aes Sedai and her warders? It was certainly better than trying to sneak 100 men through the city in alleyways unseen. As they approached the tower grounds, they entered the nightmare. The billowing smoke reflected red firelight, enveloping the tower in a menacing crimson haze. Holes and gashes broke the walls of the once majestic building. Fires blazed within several of them. Rocken commanded the air, swooping and spinning about the tower like gulls circling a dead whale in the waves. Screams and shouts permeated the air, and the thick, acrid smoke made Gowan's throat itch. Bryn's soldiers slowed as they approached. There seemed to be 2 points of combat in the raid. The base of the tower, with its 2 flanking wings, showed flashes of light. The grounds were littered with the dead and the wounded. And up above, near the middle of the tower, several gashes were spewing fireballs and lightning back out at the invaders. The rest of the tower seemed silent and dead, though surely fighting was going on in the corridors. The group pulled to a halt outside the tower grounds' iron gates. Those gates were open and completely unguarded. That seemed ominous. "Now what?" Gowan whispered. "We find Egwene," Swan answered. "We start at the base, then head down to the basement floors. She was locked down there somewhere earlier today, and it's probably the first place we should look." A spray of stone chips fell from the ceiling and rained down on the table as the White Tower shook from yet another blast. Saorin cursed to herself, wiping the chips away, then unrolled a wide piece of parchment, weighting the sides with some broken chunks of tile. Around her, the room was in virtual chaos. They were on the ground floor, in the forward gathering room, a large square chamber situated where the eastern wing met the tower proper. Members of the tower guard pulled tables out of the way to make room for the groups passing through. Aes Sedai warily glanced out the windows, watching the skies. Warders stalked like caged animals. What were they to do about flying beasts? Their best place was here, guarding the center of operations, such as it was. Saorin had only just arrived. A sister in green swept up to her. Moradri was a long-limbed Mayenner with dark skin, and she was trailed by 2 handsome warders, both also Mayenner. Rumors said that they were her brothers, come to the White Tower to defend their sister,
though Moradri didn't speak of the matter. Saren demanded, "How many?" "The ground floor has at least 47 sisters," Moradri said, "spread across the Ajas. That's the best count I could gather, as they're fighting in small groups. I told them we were organizing a formal command center here. Most seemed to think that was a good idea, though many were too tired, too shocked, or too dazed to respond with much else besides a nod. Mark their locations on the map here," Saren said. "Did you find Elida?" Moradri shook her head. "Blast," Saren muttered as the tower shook again. "What of any green sitters?" "I didn't find any," Moradri said, glancing over her shoulder, obviously eager to get back to the fighting. "A pity," Saren said. "They like to call themselves the Battle Aja, after all. Well, that leaves me to organize the fighting." Moradri shrugged. "I suppose." She glanced over her shoulder again. Saren eyed the green sister, then tapped the map. "Mark the locations, Moradri. You can be back to the fighting soon enough, but your knowledge is more important right now." The green sister sighed, but quickly began to make notations on the map. As she worked, Saren was pleased to note Captain Chubane entering. The man looked youthful for his 40-some winters, without a speck of gray in his black hair. Some men were inclined to disparage his abilities because of his too pretty face. Saren had heard of the humiliation those men had received by his sword, in return for the insults. "Ah, good," she said. "Finally, something is going well. Captain, over here, if you will." He limped over, favoring his left leg. His white tabard, hanging over mail, was scorched. His face was smudged with soot. "Saren, Sedai," he said, bowing. "You are wounded." "An inconsequential wound, Aes Sedai, in the glory of a fight such as this." "See yourself healed, anyway," she ordered. "It would be ridiculous for our captain of the guard to risk death because of an inconsequential wound. If it makes you stumble for a moment, we could lose you." The man stepped closer, speaking in a low voice. "Saren, Sedai, the tower guard is all but useless in this fight. With the Shanshan using those monstrous women, we can barely reach them before being ripped to pieces or blasted to ashes." "You need to change your tactics then, Captain," Saren said firmly. "Light, what a mess. Tell the men to switch to bows. Do not risk closing on the enemy's channelers. Shoot from a distance. A single arrow could turn the battle to our side. We have their soldiers grossly outnumbered." "Yes, Aes Sedai." "As a white might say, it's simple logic," she said. "Captain, our most important task is to form a center of operations. Aes Sedai and soldiers alike are scrambling about independently, acting like rats faced by wolves. We need to stand together." What she didn't mention was how embarrassed she was. The Aes Sedai had spent centuries guiding kings and influencing wars, but now, with their sanctuary assaulted, they had proven woefully inadequate in defending it. Egwene was right, she thought. Not just in predicting this attack, but in berating us for being divided. Saren didn't need reports from Moradri or scouts to know that the Ajas were each fighting this battle independently. "Captain," she said, "Moradri Sedai is marking pockets of fighters on the map. Ask her which Aja is represented in each group. She has an excellent memory and will be able to tell you specifics. Send runners in my authority to any group of yellow or brown sisters. Tell them to report here to this chamber. Next, send runners to the other groups and tell them that we are going to send one brown or yellow sister to them for healing purposes. There will also be a group of sisters here providing healing. Anyone wounded is to report here immediately." He saluted. "Oh," she added, "and send someone to the outer grounds to spot the main breaches above. We need to know where the invasion is deepest." "Aes Sedai," he said. "The outer grounds are dangerous. Those flying above fire on anyone they see moving." "Then send men who are good at concealing themselves," she growled. "Yes, Aes Sedai. We—" "This is a disaster!" an angry voice shouted. Saren turned to find 4 red sisters entering the room. Notasha was wearing a white dress bloodied up the left side. though if the blood was her own, she'd been healed. Katarine's mass of long black hair was frazzled and tangled with chips of stone. The other two women wore ripped dresses, faces soiled with ash. How dare they strike here? Katarine continued, crossing the room. Soldiers ducked out of her way, and several less influential sisters who had gathered at Saren's order suddenly found things to do at the corners of the room. Distant booms sounded, like the noises of an illuminator's display. They dare because they have the means and the desire, obviously, Saren replied, shoving down her annoyance and maintaining her calm, with difficulty. So far, the strike has proven remarkably effective. Well, I'm assuming command here, Katarine growled. We need to scour the tower and eliminate each of them. You will not take command, Saren said firmly. Insufferable woman! Calm, remain calm. Nor will we go on the offensive. And you will dare stop me? Katarine snarled, the glow of Sidar a burning light around her. Brown? Saren raised an eyebrow. Since when did the mistress of novices outrank a sitter in the hall, Katarine? Egwene Alvear predicted this, Saren said, grimacing. We can assume, therefore, that the other things she told us about the Shanshan are true. The Shanshan sees women who can channel and use them as weapons. They have brought no ground force. It would be near impossible to march them this far through hostile territory anyway. That means this is a raid, intended to seize as many sisters as possible. The battle has already stretched long for a raid, perhaps because we've done such a poor job of resisting that they feel they can take their time. Either way, we need to form a unified front and hold our ground. Once the battle goes more roughly for them, they will withdraw. We are in no position whatsoever to scour the tower and force them out. Katarine hesitated, considering that. Another boom sounded outside. Where do those keep coming from? Saren asked in annoyance. Haven't they made enough holes? That wasn't directed at the tower, Saren Sedai, called one of the soldiers at the room's doorway, standing just outside in the garden. He's right, Saren realized. The tower didn't shake. It didn't the time before either. What are they firing on? People down below? No, Aes Sedai, the guard said. I think it was a blast, thrown from within the tower, launched from one of the upper floors out at the flying creatures. Well, at least someone else is fighting back, Saren said. Where was it launched from? I didn't see, the soldier said, still watching the skies. Light, there it goes again. And again. Red and yellow reflected from the smoke above, bathing the garden in light barely visible through the door and windows. Rackham screamed in pain. Saren Sedai, Captain Chubane said, turning from a group of wounded soldiers. Saren hadn't seen them enter. She'd been too caught up with Katarine. These men are down from the upper levels. It appears that there's a second rallying point for the defense, and it's doing very well. The Shanshan are breaking off their attack below to focus there. Where? Saren asked eagerly. Specifically. The 22nd Aes Sedai, northeastern quarter. What? Katarine asked. The Brown Aja sections? No. That was what had been there before. Now, with the swapping of the tower's corridors, that area of the tower was the novices' quarters? Saren said. That seemed even more ridiculous. How in the world? She trailed off, eyes widening slightly. Egwene. Each faceless Shanshan that Egwene struck down seemed to be Rena in her mind's eye. Egwene stood at an open hole in the side of the white tower, wind pulling at her white dress, tugging at her hair, howling as if in accompaniment to her rage. Her anger was not out of control. It was cold and distilled. The tower was burning. She had foretold this. She had dreamed it. But the reality was far worse than she had feared. If Elida had prepared for the event, the damage would have been much less. But there was no point in longing for what had not been. Instead, she directed her anger, the anger of justice, the wrath of the Amaran. She blasted Torakan after Torakan from the air. They were much less maneuverable than their smaller cousins. She must have felled a dozen by now, and her actions had drawn the attention of those outside. The attack below was breaking off, the entire raid focusing on Egwene. The novices fought Shanshan raiding parties on the stairs, forcing them back. Torakan winged about in the air, swooping around the tower, trying to take Egwene with shields or blasts of fire. Smaller Rakan darted through the air, crossbowmen on their backs launching bolts at her. But she was a fount of power, drawn from deep within the fluted rod in her hands, channeled through a group of novices and accepted, hiding in the room behind, bound to her in circle. Egwene was part of the fires that burned in the tower, bloodying the sky with their flames, painting the air with their smoke. She almost seemed not a being of flesh, but one of pure power, sending judgment to those who had dared bring the war to the tower itself. Blasts of lightning stormed from the sky, the clouds churning above. Fire sprouted from her hands. Perhaps she should have feared breaking the 3 oaths, but she did not. This was a fight that needed to be fought, and she did not lust for death, though perhaps her rage against the Sul'dam approached it. The soldiers and Damane were unfortunate casualties. The White Tower, the sacred dwelling of the Aes Sedai, was under attack. They were all in danger, a danger greater than death. Those silvery collars were far worse. Egwene defended herself and each woman in the tower. She would make the Shanshan withdraw. Shield after shield came to sever her from the source, but they were like the hands of children, trying to stem the roaring flow of a waterfall. With this much power, she could not be stopped save by a full circle, and the Shanshan didn't use circles. The Adam prevented it. The attackers prepared weaves to strike her down, but each time Egwene struck first, either deflecting the balls of fire with a blast of air, or simply bringing down the Torakan who carried the women trying to kill her. Some beasts had flown away into the night, bearing captives. Egwene had felled the ones she could, but there'd been so many Torakan in this raid. Some would escape. Sisters would be captured. She formed a ball of fire in each hand, blasting another beast from the sky as it swooped too close. Yes, some would escape, but they would pay dearly. That was another goal. She had to make certain they never attacked the tower again. This raid had to cost them.
Bryn, above you! Garth dodged to the side, rolling with a grunt, breastplate digging into his sides and belly as he hit cobblestones. Something massive in the air passed just above him, and a thudding crash followed. He came up on one knee to see a burning Rakan tumbling across the ground where he had been standing, its rider, already dead from the fire blast that had killed his mount, tumbling free like a rag doll. The Rakan corpse, still smoldering, slumped to a rest beside the tower wall. The rider lay where he had fallen, the helm bouncing away into the darkness. One of the corpse's boots was missing. Bryn heaved himself to his feet and pulled his belt knife free. He dropped his sword in the roll. He spun, scanning for danger. There was plenty of it to be found. Rakan swooped, big ones and small ones, though most were fixated on the tower above. The inner green at the front of the tower was studded with chunks of stone and bodies twisted into horrific positions. Bryn's men were fighting a squadron of Shanshan soldiers. The invaders, in their insectile armor, had piled out of the tower moments ago. Were the Shanshan running away from something or just looking for a fight? There were a good 30 of them. Had the soldiers come out to this courtyard to be lifted away? Well, either way, they had met an unexpected force in Bryn's soldiers. Lightly blessed, there were no channelers in the group. With over 2-to-1 odds, Bryn's men should have had an easy time of it. Unfortunately, there were some few of the bigger Rakan above dropping stones and fireballs on the courtyard's occupants. And these Shanshan fought well. Very well. Bryn called for his men to stand fast, glancing about for his sword. Gawain, the one who had warned him earlier, stood near it, dueling 2 Shanshan at once. Had the boy no sense?
Hey, Fire, how you
Gawain's
doing?
force had the upper hand.
I got
He should have had a sword mate with him.
2 roach joints rolled
Gowan
up.
dispatched both Sean-Chan with one fluid motion. Was that lotus closes its blossom? Bryn had never seen it used so effectively against 2 men at once. Gowan wiped his weapon as part of a traditional finishing flourish, then sheathed it and kicked Bryn's fallen sword up into the air and snatched it. He fell into a guard position, holding the sword, wary. Bryn's line of men was holding, despite the attacks from above. Gowan nodded to Bryn, waving him forward with the sword. Metal on metal rang across the courtyard, shadows thrown across the scarred grass, lit by the fires above. Bryn took his sword back, and Gowan unsheathed his own blade, on edge. "Look up there," he said, and pointed with his sword. Bryn squinted. There was a great deal of activity near a hole in one of the upper floors. He pulled free his spyglass, focusing on the location, trusting in Gowan to warn him if danger approached. "By the light," Bryn whispered, focusing on the gap. A solitary figure wearing white stood in the tower's rent. It was too distant to make out her face, even with the spyglass. But whoever she was certainly doing some damage to the Sean-Chan. Her arms were upraised with fire glowing between her hands, the burning light throwing shadows across the outer tower wall around her. Blasts of fire flew in a steady stream, flinging rocken from the sky. He raised his spyglass higher, scanning the length of the tower, searching for other signs of resistance. There was activity on the flat, circular roof. It was so distant he could barely make it out. It looked like poles being raised, followed by rockets swooping down and... What? Each time a rocket swooped by...
Not too bad. Can't complain too much.
Captives, Bryn realized with a chill. They're taking captive Aes Sedai to the roof, tying ropes to them. Then the rocket are snatching those ropes and towing the women into the air. Light.
Yeah, there's still a little bit left. I could do a little bit of a dab.
Away. It looked as if she had a sack tied over
What I
her
like
head.
about this new one I got,
We have to get into the
I
tower.
put a little nice little bit in there,
Just a distraction.
hit it,
Agreed.
then come back and hit it again because there's still a little bit
He
left
glanced to
in
the
there.
side of the courtyard where Swan had said she'd wait while the men fought. Time to collect her, and she was gone. Bryn felt a spike of shock followed by one of terror. Where was she? If that woman had gotten herself killed. But no,
Okay.
he could sense her inside the tower. She wasn't hurt. This bond was such a wondrous thing, but he was too unaccustomed to it. He should have noticed that she was gone.
Just
He
gotta
scanned
wait
his
for it
line
to
of
heat
soldiers.
up and
The Sean
we'll
had
do a
fought
little
well,
bit of
but they were
dab
visibly
and
routed now.
smoke a joint.
Their line was breaking, scattering in all directions, and Bryn barked the order for his men not to follow. "First and second squads, gather the wounded quickly," he called. "Carry them to the side of the courtyard. Those who can walk should head directly for the boat." He grimaced. "Those who can't walk will need to rest around the guy to heal them." The soldiers nodded. The badly wounded would be abandoned into enemy hands, but they had been warned of that possibility before coming on this mission. Recovering the armorman outweighed all other concerns. Some men would die from their wounds while they waited. There was nothing he could do about that. Hopefully, most would be healed by the White Tower Aes Sedai. That healing would be followed by imprisonment, but there was no other choice. The team of soldiers had to be moving quickly, and there was no time for litters to carry the wounded. "Third and fourth squads," he began, urgent. He stopped as a familiar form in a blue dress strode out of the tower, towing a girl in white. Of course, Swan herself looked only faintly older than the girl now. At times, he had difficulty connecting her to the stern woman he had met years ago.
And there's still a little bit of a
Feeling
pull
a
so I
sense
could
of
do
relief, he
another one.
confronted Swan as she approached.
As long as I keep
"Who
it at
is
this
that?"
lower
he
heat, I
demanded.
can do more.
"Where did you go?"
If I raise it just a little bit,
She
it's
clicked her
gonna
tongue, telling
be
the
like
novice
doing a
to
hot
wait,
dab.
then pulling Bryn away
At least
to
with
speak to her
the
in a low
wax that I
voice.
have, with the consistency
"Your
it is.
soldiers were busy, and I decided it would be a good time to gather some information. And I might note, we're going to have to work on your attitude, Garth Bryn. That's not the proper way for a warder to speak to his Aes Sedai. I'll start worrying about that when you start acting like you have 2 bits of sense in your head, woman.
Yeah.
What if you'd run into Sean-Chan? Then I would have been in danger," she said, hands on hips. "It wouldn't be the first time. I couldn't risk being seen by other Aes Sedai with you or your soldiers. Such simple disguises won't fool a sister." "And if you've been recognized?" he demanded. "Swan, these people tried to execute you." She sniffed. "Moraine herself wouldn't recognize me with this face. The women in the tower will just see a young Aes Sedai who looks faintly familiar. Besides, I didn't find any of them, just this child. She glanced at the novice. The girl had a short bob of black hair and stared, terrified, at the battle in the sky above. Ashala, come here, Swan called. The novice scurried over. Tell this man what you told me, Swan commanded. Yes, Aes Sedai, the novice said with an anxious curtsy. Bryn's soldiers made an honor guard around Swan, and Gawain stepped up beside Bryn. The young man's eyes kept flicking toward the deadly sky. The Amerlin, Egwene Elvir, the novice said in a quivering voice. She was released from the cells earlier today and allowed to return to the novices' quarters. I was down in the lower kitchens when the attack came, so I don't know what has happened to her. But she's probably up on the 21st or 22nd level somewhere. That's where the novices' quarters are now. She grimaced. The inside of the tower is a mess these days. Nothing is where it should be. Swan met Bryn's eyes. Egwene's been given fork root in heavy doses. She'll barely be able to channel. We've got to reach her, Gawain said. Obviously, Bryn said, rubbing his chin. That's why we're here. I guess we go up instead of down, then. You're here to rescue her, aren't you? The novice sounded eager. Bryn eyed the girl. Child, I wish you hadn't made that connection. He hated the thought of leaving a mere novice tied up in the middle of this mess. But they couldn't have her running to give warning to the White Tower Aes Sedai. I want to go with you, the novice said fervently. I'm loyal to the Amerlin, the real Amerlin. Most of us are. Bryn raised an eyebrow, glancing at Swan. Let her come, the Aes Sedai said. It's the easier option anyway. She moved over to begin asking the girl a few more questions. Bryn stepped to the side as one of his captains, a man named Vestas, approached.
Yep,
Lord,
lighting number
Vestas
one.
said urgently, his voice a deep whisper.
This one should
The
burn for a
wounded are
little
sorted.
bit because it's
We lost 12 men.
it's roaches.
Another 15 are wounded but can walk and are heading for the boats. 6 are wounded too badly to go with them. Vestas hesitated. 3 won't last the hour, my lord. Bryn gritted his teeth. We move on. I feel that pain, Bryn, Swan said, turning around and eyeing him. What is it? We don't have time. The Amerlin can wait another moment. What is it? 3 men, he said. I have to leave 3 of my men to die. Not if I hear them, Swan said. Show me. Bryn made no further objection, though he did glance at the sky. Several of the rocket had landed elsewhere in the tower grounds, big black shapes, lit by the fires in flickering orange. The fleeing Shanshan were congregating at them. Those were the ground assault troops, he thought. They really are pulling out. The raid is ending. Which meant they were running out of time. As soon as the Shanshan left, the White Tower would start to reorganize. They needed to reach Egwene. I'd said that she hadn't been captured. Still, if Swan wanted to heal the soldiers, then it was her decision. He just hoped that these 3 lives did not end up costing the life of the Amerlin.
That and what I like
Vestas had
about
set
it
the 3
is
soldiers by
what's been
themselves
called.
at the side of the green, beneath the boughs of a large
It
shade
definitely
tree.
makes you. It's
Bryn brought a
seems
squad
like
of
it's more
soldiers, leaving
turns
Gawain
to
to organize the
sativa
rest
because
of the band and followed Swan
not
over to the
sativa. I mean
wounded.
indica because it
She
makes you
knelt beside the
tired
first
and
man.
more
Her skill in
relaxed.
healing was not the best. She'd warned Bryn of this ahead of time. But perhaps she could
That
make
roaches
these 3
are
well enough that
definitely
they would
good
survive to be discovered and taken by the White
nighttime
Tower.
smoke.
She worked quickly, and Bryn noticed that she'd done herself an injustice. She seemed to do a creditable job with the healing. Still, it took time. He scanned the courtyard, feeling his anxiety rise. Though blasts were still being exchanged on the upper floors, the lower floors and grounds were silent. The only sounds nearby were those of the groaning wounded and the crackling of flames. Light, he thought, surveying the rubble, running his eyes over the tower's base. The east wing's roof and far wall had been leveled, and flames flickered inside the structure. The courtyard was a mess of rubble and gouges. Smoke hung in the air, pungent and thick. Would the Ogier be willing to return and rebuild this magnificent structure? Would it ever be the same again? Or had a seemingly eternal
Didn't know
marvel
that.
fallen this evening? Was he proud or grieved to have witnessed it? A shadow moved in the darkness beside the tree. Bryn moved without thought. 3 things in him mixed. Years of training with the sword, a lifetime of practiced battlefield reflexes, and a new bond-enhanced
Hey,
awareness
John McDonald, how you
all came
doing?
together in one motion. His sword was out in a heartbeat,
Yeah.
and he performed Black
9
Lance's
days.
last strike, slamming his sword straight into the neck of the dark figure. All was still. Swan, shocked, looked up from the
Hopefully it
man
goes
she was
better
healing.
because
Bryn's sword extended directly over her shoulder.
I've had a
ranged the
little
neck
bit
of
of
a
bad
Shan
luck
soldier
coming up to
in
my
pure
birthday.
black
My
armor.
belt broke.
The man
My
silently
light
dropped
table
the
to do
wicked
my
barb of his
diamond art
short sword,
broke.
slathered
Luckily
with a
for
viscous
that,
oil.
I had a backup
Twitching,
light
he reached
table
for
that's
Bryn's
a lot
sword as if to
smaller,
push it
but
free.
it'll
His
get the
fingers
job
gripped
done.
Bryn's arm for a moment.
Cause I had to make
Then the man slid backward off
I
Bryn's
just
blade
did
into the
up a
ground.
real fast,
He spasmed once, whispering something
braided up
distinct
some
despite the
paracord
bubbling
and
of his
made a
bleeding throat.
temporary belt.
Marath, Damani. Light, brand me, Swan breathed, raising a hand to her breast. What was that? He wasn't dressed like the others, Bryn said, shaking his head. The armor is different. Assassin of some sort. Light, Swan said. I didn't even see him. He almost seemed part of the darkness itself. Assassins. They always seem to look the same,
But yeah, I
regardless
just
of the
did up a
culture.
real fast
Bryn sheathed
little
his sword.
paracord one till
That was the first time
I'm
he ever
able
used
to
Black Lance's last
get a
strike
belt.
in combat. It was a simple form intended for only one thing: speed.
Hey, Sam Squash, how
Draw
you
the sword
doing,
and strike
bro?
into the neck in one fluid motion. If you missed, you usually died. You saved my life, Swan said, looking up at Bryn. Her face was mostly shadowed. By the seas at midnight, she said. The blasted girl was right. Who? Bryn asked, warily scanning the darkness for more assassins. He waved curtly, and his men sheepishly opened their lanterns further. The assassins' attack had come so quickly that they had barely moved. If Bryn hadn't had the speed of a water bond. Min, Swan said, sounding tired. Those healings seemed to have taken a lot out of her. She said I had to stay near you. She paused. If you hadn't come tonight, I would have died. Well, Bryn said, I am your warder. I suspect it won't be the only time.
Yeah, that's the only part that sucks about that is trying to find it in this town.
Yes,
because they
said,
have that,
but this is different.
The prices on some
Men
of them
said
are
I'd die, and
at least I
No,
consider expensive.
that's not what
They're like
men said
$40,
exactly.
$50 for a belt,
She said that if I didn't stay close to you,
and it's
we'd
mainly
both
because it's an oil
What are
field
you-
town, and
Bryn said,
you
turning
got
toward
a
her.
lot of well,
Hush, Swan said,
a
taking
good
his head in her
majority of the people in
He felt a
town
strange
aren't even
prickling sensation.
from here. They're
Was she
just
using
oil
the
field
power
workers that come in,
What was going on?
and
He
they're
recognized
able
that
to
shock,
afford it
like
because
ice in the veins.
they make
She was
money.
healing him.
They make good money
But
doing
why?
the oil field
He
work.
wasn't
So
wounded.
everyone around
Swan
town
took her
likes
hands
to
off his face. Then
to
tears
charge
flooded with a
everyone like
sudden look of
that,
exhaustion.
thinking that everyone
He grabbed her
that lives
to
here
help
makes that
steady
kind of
her,
money
but
when
she
we
shook her
don't.
head and righted herself. Here, she said, grabbing his sword arm, twisting it so that the wrist was
To the
visible.
belt I did have,
There, pressed
that
into his
broke,
skin, was a tiny black
damn,
pin. She yanked it free.
I got that like
Bryn felt a
5
chill
years ago,
totally
maybe a little
unrelated
bit
to the healing.
longer, and it's lasted that long.
Poisoned? He asked, glancing at the dead man. When he reached for my arm, it wasn't a simple death spasm. Probably had a numbing agent on it. Swan
Oh no, it
angrily,
actually
then
cracked
went
on
to sit down.
one of the
She tossed
boards
the pin aside, and it
on it,
suddenly burst
so
into flames, the poison evaporating beneath the heat of her channeling.
there's no helping it. But I got another table that I had for a
His brow
backup.
was damp. Did you?
I just like that one because it was a lot bigger.
Swan
The
nodded.
one I have now, I have to
It was
move side to
surprisingly
side.
easy. There was only a little in your system. It would have killed you anyway. You'll have to thank me
And
next time
that
you
bigger
see her,
light
Bryn.
table, I bought
She
that.
just saved both of our lives.
It's lasted me good couple years,
But
if
I
not
wouldn't have been
longer.
poisoned if I hadn't come. Don't try
And
to
I
apply
bought that
logic to a viewing or
on
foretelling like this.
that
Swan said, grimacing.
Chimu
You're alive, I'm alive.
app,
I suggest we
and I
leave it
ended
at
up
that.
paying like 40
You feel good
bucks
enough
for
to
it.
keep going? Does it matter? Bryn said. I'm not about to let you go on without me.
They had a break
Let's move then. Swan said,
right near the end
taking a
of
deep breath and climbing to
the
her feet.
diamond painting that I've been
The
working
rest
on
hadn't
for
been
the
nearly long
past
enough,
year.
but he didn't challenge her.
I've been working
These
on
three
one
soldiers
that's
of
been
yours will survive
it's
tonight.
a
I've done what I can
little bit
for
over
them.
a year's worth of progress on it,
Egwene sat,
but it's
exhausted, on a pile of rubble,
It's
staring
about
out of the hole in the white tower, watching fires burning below.
about like that wide.
Figures moved about them,
and
one
about
by
4
one the
foot
fires
tall.
winked out. Whoever had been running the resistance was quick-minded enough to realize that the fires could prove as dangerous as the
Guys
Shonchan.
had to
But a few
wait
sisters
to
leaving air or water could
try to
make
save
short
up
work
the
of
money to
flames, preserving the tower.
get another light
What was
table,
left
at
of
least a bigger light table.
Egwene
I got
closed
a
her
couple
eyes
of big
and lay
projects
back, resting against
that's
the
on order
fragments
for
of a
people.
wall, feeling the fresh breeze blow
And
closer. The Shonchan were
about
gone. The last Torokan
I gotta
vanishing
save
into
up
the
for
night.
that.
That moment, watching it flee, was the moment when Egwene realized how hard she'd taxed herself and the poor novices she'd been drawing through. She'd released them with orders to go directly to sleep.
Because the one I've been
The other
working
women
on,
she'd gathered were caring for wounded,
I'm
were
doing it
working
for
on
a
the
friend of
fires on the
mine
upper levels.
because she wanted one
Egwene
of
wanted to help,
them in her
a
room
part
because she
of her
does
did, a sliver.
she does tattoos
right,
and
she
she
was
wanted
tired.
she's
She
seen the
couldn't
ones I've
channel
done
another trickle,
and she
not
wanted
even
one
using the Sangreal.
for her
She'd pushed
tattoo
the
room that
limits
she
of
could
what she
have
could
something
manage.
done by me.
But she was so worn
And
out now that she wouldn't be able
I
to
sent her
embrace
some
the source if
pictures.
she
Well,
tried.
she gave me a
She'd
general
fought.
idea what she
She'd
wanted.
been
I
glorious
sent her
and
some pictures of
destructive,
the ones I
the
found,
armament of judgment and fury,
and she
green
picked that
Aga to
one
the
that I'm
core.
working on.
And still
And
the
I
tower
didn't
had
look
burned.
before I
And still
ordered it
more Torokan had escaped than had
on the
fallen.
price it was going to be.
The count
I guess
of
I should have
wounded among
suspected
those
it when I
she'd
had to
gathered
pay
was somewhat encouraging. Only 3 novices
the
and 1
price I
Aes
had to pay
Sedai
for
dead,
it.
while they'd gathered 10
But
Damane
it's
and killed
been over a
dozens of
year's worth of
soldiers.
progress. But
But what of the other floors?
I said I'd make it
The White
for her, so
Tower
I'm
would
not
not
charging
come
her
out ahead
for
in
it.
this
So
battle. The White Tower was broken, physically now as well as spiritually.
yeah, that's the one I had
They'd
was
need a strong
A4.
leader to rebuild. The next few days would be pivotal. It made her more than exhausted to consider the work she'd need to do. She had protected many. She had resisted and fought. But this day
And I got
still
another one
marked
for a
one of the
friend of
greatest
mine.
disasters in the history of the Aes Sedai.
But
Can't think of that, she told herself.
neither one of them that I'm doing this one
things.
for, and the other one that I got for
She would get
a
up
buddy of
soon.
mine that's still
She would
due.
leave the novices and
is,
Aes Sedai on these upper floors as they cleaned up. And
It's a lot
assessed the
smaller
damage.
than what I'm working on.
She would be strong and capable. The others would be tempted to fall into despair, and she needed to be positive for them. But she could take a few minutes. She just needed to rest for a little while. She barely noticed when someone picked her up. She tiredly opened her eyes and, though numb of mind, was astonished to find that she was being carried by Gawain Tracan. His forehead was smeared with crusty dried blood, but his face was determined. "I've got you, Egwene," he said, glancing down. "I'll protect you." Oh, she thought, closing her eyes again. Good. Such a pleasant dream. She smiled. Wait, no, that wasn't right. She wasn't supposed to be leaving the tower. She tried to voice complaint, but she could barely mumble. "Fish guts," she heard Swan Sanche say. "What did they do to her?" "Is she wounded?" Another voice, Gareth Bryn. "No," Egwene thought numbly. "No, you have to let me go. I can't leave. Not now." "They just left her there, Swan," Gawain said. His voice was so nice to hear. "Defenseless in the hallway. Anyone could have come upon her like that. What if the Shonchan had discovered her?" "I destroyed them," she thought with a smile, thoughts slipping away from her. "I was a burning warrior, a hero called by the horn. They won't dare face me again." She almost fell asleep, but being jostled by Gawain's steps kept her awake. Barely. "Oh!" She distantly heard Swan's voice. "What's this?" "Light, Egwene. Where did you get this?" "This is the most powerful one in the tower." "What is it, Swan?" Bryn's voice asked. "Our way out," Swan said distantly. Egwene sensed something. Channeling. Powerful channeling. "You asked about sneaking back out with all the activity in the courtyard? Well, with this, I'm strong enough for traveling. Let's go collect those soldiers with the boats and hop back to camp." "No," Egwene thought, clawing through her drowsiness, forcing her eyes open. "I'm winning. Don't you see? If I offer leadership now when the rubble is being cleared, they'll see me as Amerlin for certain. I have to stay. I have to. Gawain carried her through the gateway, leaving the hallways of the White Tower behind. Saerin finally let herself sit. The gathering room that was her center of operations had also become a room for separating and healing the wounded. Yellow and brown sisters moved down the lines of soldiers, servants, and other sisters, focusing on the worst cases first. There were a frightful number of dead, including over 20 Aes Sedai so far, but the Shan-Chan had withdrawn, as Saerin had predicted. Thank the light for that. Saerin herself sat at the far northwestern corner of the room, beneath a fine painting of Tyr in spring, perched on a short stool and accepting reports as they came. The wounded groaned, and the room smelled of blood and of heal-all, which was used on those whose wounds didn't demand immediate healing. The room also smelled of smoke. That was ever present tonight.
I'll be right back.
More and more soldiers approached her, handing in reports of damage and casualties. Saerin didn't want to read further, but it was better than listening to those groans. Where under the light was Elida? Nobody had seen anything of the Amerlin during the battle, but much of the upper tower had been cut off from the lower portions. Hopefully the Amerlin and the Hall could be gathered soon to present a strong leadership in the crisis. Saerin accepted another report, then raised her eyebrows at what it said. Only 3 novices in Egwene's group of over 60 had died, and only 1 sister out of some 40 she had gathered. 10 Shan-Chan channelers captured, over 30 Rakan blown from the air. Light. That made Saerin's own efforts seem downright amateur by comparison. And this was the woman Elida kept trying to insist was simply a novice? Saerin, said I, a man's voice asked. Hmm? She asked, distracted. You should hear what this accepted has to say. Saerin looked up, realizing that the voice belonged to Captain Chubane. He had his hand on the shoulder of a young Arafellan accepted with blue eyes and a plump, round face. What was her name? Mare, that was it. The poor child looked ragged. Her face sported a number of cuts and some scrapes that would likely bruise. Her accepted dress was ripped on the sleeve and shoulder. Child? Saerin asked, glancing at Chubane's worried face. What was wrong? Saerin, said I, the girl whispered, curtsying, then wincing at the action. Spit it out, child, Saerin demanded. This isn't a night for dawdling. Mare looked down. It's the Amerlin, Saerin, said I. Elida, said I. I was attending her tonight, taking transcriptions for her. And what? Saerin said, feeling a growing chill. The girl started crying. The entire wall burst in, Saerin, said I. The rubble covered me. I think they thought I was dead. I couldn't do anything. I'm sorry. Light intercede, Saerin thought. She can't be saying what I think she is. Can she? Elida awoke to a very odd sensation. Why was her bed moving? Rippling,
Did she get captured?
Rhythmic. And that wind. Had Carlia left the window open? If so, the maid would be beaten. She'd been warned.
No, she got captured and collared.
This was not her bed. Elida opened her eyes and found herself looking down at a dark landscape hundreds of feet below. She was tied to the back of some strange beast. She couldn't move. Why couldn't she move? She reached for the source, then felt a sudden sharp pain, as though she had suddenly been beaten on every inch of her body with 1,000 rods. She reached up, dazed, feeling the collar at her throat. There was a dark figure riding in the saddle next to her. No lanterns lit the woman's face, but Elida could feel her somehow. Elida could just barely remember spending time dangling in the air, tied to a rope, as she fell in and out of consciousness. When had she been pulled up? What was happening? A voice whispered from the night. I shall forgive that little mistake. You have been Marath Damane for very long, and bad habits are to be expected. But you will not reach for the source again without permission. Do you understand? Release me! Elida bellowed. The pain returned tenfold, and Elida retched at the intensity of it. Her bile and siccup fell over the side of the beast and dropped far to the ground below. No, no, the voice said, patient, like a woman speaking to a very young child. You must learn. Your name is Safa, and Safa will be a good Damane. Yes, she will. A very, very good Damane. Elida screamed again, and this time she didn't stop when the pain came. She just kept screaming out into the uncaring night.
Chapter 42. Before the Stone of Tyr. We don't know the names of the women who were in Grendel's palace, Luz Theron said. I can't add them to the list. Rand tried to ignore the madman. That proved impossible. Luz Theron continued. How can we continue the list if we don't know the names? In war, we sought out the maidens who had fallen. We found every one. The list is flawed. I can't continue. It's not your list, Rand growled. It's mine, Luz Theron. Mine. No, the madman sputtered. Who are you? It's mine. I made it. I can't continue now that they're dead. Oh, light. Balefire? Why did we use balefire? I promised that I would never do that again. Rand squeezed his eyes shut, holding tightly to Tadaishar's reins. The warhorse picked his way down the street. The hooves hit packed earth, one after another. What have we become? Luz Theron whispered. We're going to do it again, aren't we? Kill them all. Everyone we've loved. Again, again, again. Again and again, Rand whispered. It doesn't matter as long as the world survives. They cursed me before, swore at Dragon Mountain by my name, but they lived. We're here ready to fight, again and again. Rand? Min asked. He opened his eyes. She rode her dun mare next to Tadaishar. He couldn't let her or any of them see him slipping. They mustn't know how close he was to collapsing. So many names we don't know, Luz Theron whispered. So many dead by our hand. And it was just the beginning. I'm well, Min, he said. I was thinking. About the people, Min asked. The wooden walks of Bandar Eben were filled with people. Rand no longer saw the colors of their clothing. He saw how worn that clothing was. He saw the rips in the magnificent fabric, the threadbare patches, the dirt and the stains. Virtually everyone in Bandar Eben was a refugee of one sort or another. They watched him with haunted eyes. Each time he'd conquered a kingdom before, he'd left it better than when he'd arrived. Rand had removed forsaken tyrants, brought an end to warfare and sieges. He'd cast out Shido invaders. He'd delivered food. He'd created stability. Each land he'd destroyed had essentially been saved at the same time. Arid Daman was different. He'd brought in food, but that food had drawn even more refugees, straining his supplies. Not only had he failed to give them peace with the Shan-Chan, he had appropriated their only troops and sent them up to watch the borderlands. The seas were still unsafe. The tiny Shan-Chan Empress hadn't trusted him. She would continue her attacks, perhaps double them. The Dumani would be trampled beneath the hooves of war, crushed between the invading Trollocs to the north and the Shan-Chan to the south. And Rand was leaving them. Somehow the people realized that, and it was very hard for Rand to look at them. Their hungry eyes accused him. Why bring hope, then let it dry up like a newly dug well during a drought? Why force us to accept you as our ruler, only to abandon us? Flynn and Nafe had ridden before him. He could see their black coats ahead as they sat their horses watching Rand's procession approach the city square. The pins sparkled on their high collars. The fountain in the square still flowed among gleaming copper horses, leaping from copper waves. Which of those silent Domani continued to shine the fountain when no king ruled and half the merchant council was lost? Rand's Aiel hadn't been able to track down enough of the council to form a majority. He suspected that Grendal had killed or captured enough of them to keep a new king from ever being chosen. If any of the Merchant Council members had been pretty enough, they'd have joined the ranks of her pets, which meant that Rand had killed them. Oh, Luce Theron said. Names I can add to the list. Yes. Bashir rode up beside Rand, knuckling his mustaches, looking thoughtful. Your will is done, he said. Lady Chadmar? Rand asked. Returned to her mansion, Bashir said. We've done the same with the other 4 members of the Merchant Council the Aiel were holding near the city. They understand what they are to do. Yes, Bashir said, sighing. But I don't think they'll do it. If you ask me, the moment we're gone, they'll bolt from the city like thieves fleeing a prison once the guards leave. Rand gave no reaction. He'd ordered the Merchant Council to choose new members, then pick a king. But Bashir was probably right. Already Rand had reports from the other cities along the coast where he'd told his Aiel to withdraw. The city leaders were vanishing, running before the presumed Shonchan assault. Our Daman as a kingdom was finished. Like a table laden with too much weight, it would soon collapse. It is not my problem, Rand thought, not looking at the people. I did everything I could. That wasn't true. Though he'd wanted to help the Damani, his real reasons for coming had been to deal with the Shonchan, to find out what had happened to the king, and to track down Grendal, not to mention to secure what he could of the borderlands. What news from Ituralda? Rand asked. Nothing good, I'm afraid, Bashir said grimly. He said skirmishes with Trollocs, but you knew that already. The Shadowspawn always withdraw quickly, but he warns that something is gathering. His scouts catch glimpses of forces large enough to overrun him. If the Trollocs are gathering there, then they're likely gathering elsewhere as well, particularly the Gap. Curse those Borderlanders, Rand thought. I will have to do something about them. Soon. Reaching the square, he reined in Tadaishar and nodded to Flynn and Nave. At his signal, they each opened a large gateway in the city square. Rand had wanted to leave directly from Lady Chadmar's mansion grounds, but that would have been to vanish like a thief, there one day and gone the next. He would at least let the people see that he was leaving, and know that they had been left to themselves. They lined the boardwalks, much as they had when Rand had first entered the city. If possible, they were more quiet now than they had been. Women in their sleek gowns, men in colorful coats and ruffled sleeves beneath. There were many without the coppery skin of the Damani. Rand had lured so many to the city with promises of food. Time to go. He approached one of the gateways, but a voice called out. Lord Dragon! The voice was easy to hear, since the crowds were so silent. Rand turned in his saddle, seeking out the source of the voice. A willowy man in a red Damani coat, buttoned at the waist, open in a V up the front, with a ruffled shirt beneath. His golden earrings sparkled as he elbowed his way through the crowd. The Aiel intercepted him, but Rand recognized him as one of the dockmasters. Rand nodded for the Aiel to let the man, Iwerlin was his name, approach. Iwerlin hurried up to Tadaishar. He was uncharacteristically clean-shaven for a Damani man, and his eyes were shadowed from lack of sleep. My Lord Dragon, the man said in a hushed voice, standing beside Rand's horse. The food. It is spoiled. What food? Rand asked. All of it, the man said, voice taut. Every barrel, every sack, every bit in our stores and in the sea folk ships. My lord, it's not just full of weevils. It's grown black and bitter, and it makes men sick to eat it. All of it? He repeated, shocked. Everything, Iverlin said softly. Hundreds upon hundreds of barrels. It happened suddenly in the blink of an eye. One moment it was good, the next moment... My lord, so many people have come to the city because they heard we have food. Now we have nothing. What will we do? Rand closed his eyes. My lord? Iverlin asked. Rand opened his eyes and kicked Tadaishar into motion. He left the dockmaster behind, mouth open, and his eyes wide. He looked at the and passed through the gateway. There was nothing more Rand could do, nothing more he would do. He put the coming starvation out of his mind. It was shocking how easy that was. Bandar Eben vanished. Those two silent people vanished. The moment he passed through the gateway, cheers exploded from the waiting crowds. It was so shocking, such a contrast, that Rand pulled Tadaishar up short, stunned. Tears spread before him. This was one of the great cities, massive and sprawling, and the gateways opened directly into Feaster's Run, one of the main city squares. A short rank of Ashaman saluted with fists to chests. Rand had sent them on earlier in the morning to prepare the city for his arrival and clear the square for gateways. The people continued their cheers. Thousands had gathered, and banners of light flapped atop dozens of poles held aloft by the crowd. The adulation hit Rand like a wave of reproach. He didn't deserve such praise, not after what he had done in Arad Daman. Must keep moving, he thought, kicking Tadaishar into motion again. The horse's hooves fell on flagstones here, rather than rain-dampened dirt. Bandar Eben was a large city, but Tyr was something else entirely. Streets snaked across the landscape, lined with buildings that most country folk would have called cramped, but that were ordinary to the Tyrans. Many of the peaked slate or tile roofs had men or boys perched on their edges, hoping for a better view of the Lord Dragon. The building stones were a lighter hue here than they had been in Bandar Eben, and they were the preferred building material. Perhaps that was because of the fortress that loomed above the city. The Stone of Tyr, it was called, a relic of a previous age, still impressive. Rand trotted forward, Nin and Bashir still riding nearby. Those crowds roared, so loud. Nearby, two flapping pendants got caught in the wind and inexplicably entangled.
Battery low. Battery 10%.
But they were knotted tight, somehow twisted that way by the wind. Rand passed them with barely any notice. He'd stopped feeling surprised. Nature could do. Rand was surprised, however, to see so many foreigners in the crowd. That wasn't so unusual. Tyr always saw a lot of outlanders. It welcomed those who would trade spices and silks from the east, porcelain from the seas, grains of tobacco from the north, and stories from anywhere they could be gleaned. However, Rand had found that outlanders, no matter what the city, paid him less heed when he visited. This was true even when those outlanders were from another country he had conquered. When he was in Cairhien, the Cairhienin would fawn over him, but if he were in Ilion, the Cairhienin would avoid him. Perhaps they didn't like being reminded that their lord and their enemy's lord were the same man. Here, however, he had no trouble counting foreigners. Sea folk with their dark skin and their loose, bright clothing. Urandians in their long coats and waxed mustaches. Bearded Ilioners with upturned collars. Pale-faced Cairhienin with stripes on their clothing. There were also men and women who wore simple Andoran wool. Fewer of the foreigners cheered than locals, but they were there, watchful. Bashir scanned the crowd. The people seem surprised, Rand found himself saying. You've been away for a time. Bashir knuckled his mustaches in thought. No doubt the rumors have flown swifter than arrows, and many an innkeeper has spun tales of your death or disappearance to encourage another round of drinks. Light. I seem to spend half of my life trampling down one rumor or another. When will it end? Bashir laughed. When you can stop rumor itself, I'll get off my horse and ride a goat. Ha! And become one of the sea folk as well. Rand fell silent. His followers continued to pile through the gateways. As the Saldaeans entered Tyr, nearly to a man they held their lances up straighter, their horses prancing. The Aes Sedai wouldn't be caught preening, but they did look less wilted, their ageless faces regarding the crowd with a sagacious manner. And the Aiel, their prowling steps a little less wary, their expressions less guarded, seemed more comfortable with the cheering than they had with those quiet, accusing Domani eyes. Bashir and Rand moved over to the side, Min following silently. She looked distracted. Nynaeve and Cadswain had not been in the mansion when Rand had announced his departure. What could they be up to? He doubted they were together. Those women barely tolerated being in the same room. Anyway, they would hear where he had gone, and they would find him. From this point on, Rand would be easy to locate. No more hiding in wooded manors. No more traveling alone. Not with Lan and his Valkyria riding to the Gap. There wasn't enough time left. Bashir watched the open gateways, the Aiel passing through on silent feet. This method of voyaging was becoming familiar to them. "Are you going to tell Ataralda?" Bashir finally asked. "About your withdrawal?" "He will hear," Rand said. "His messengers were ordered to bring reports to Bandar Eben. They will soon discover I'm no longer there." "And if he leaves the borderlands to resume his war against the Shan-Chan?" "Then he'll slow the Shan-Chan down," Rand said, "and keep them from nipping at my heels. That will be as good a use for him as any." Bashir eyed him. "What do you expect me to do, Bashir?" Rand asked quietly. That look was a challenge, if a subtle one, but Rand would not rise to it. His anger remained frozen. Bashir sighed. "I don't know," he said. "The whole thing is a mess, and I don't see any way out of it, man. Going to war with the Shan-Chan at our backs, that's as bad a position as I can think of." "I know," Rand said, looking over the city. "Tyr will be theirs by the time this is through. Probably Ilion as well. Burn me, but we'll be lucky if they don't conquer all the way up to Andor while our backs are turned. But we have to assume that Ataralda will abandon his post once news of my failure reaches him. That means our next move has to be toward the Borderlander army. Whatever complaint your kinsmen have with me, it must be settled quickly. I have little patience for men who abandon their duties." "Have we done that?" Lews Therin asked. "Who have we abandoned?" "Quiet," Rand growled. "Go back to your tears, madman, and leave me be." Bashir leaned back thoughtfully in his saddle. If he was thinking of Rand abandoning the Damani, he said nothing. Finally, he shook his head. "I don't know what Tenobia is about. Could be as simple as her anger at me for leaving to follow you. Could be as difficult as a demand that you submit to the will of the Borderlander monarchs. I can't imagine what would draw her and the others away from the Blight at a time like this." "We will soon find out," Rand said. "I want you to take a couple of the Ashaman and find out where Tenobia and the others are camped. Maybe we'll discover they've given up this fool's parade and turned back toward where they belong." "All right, then," Bashir said. "Let me see my men settled and I'll be off." Rand nodded sharply, then turned his mount and began to trot down the street. The people were lined up on either side, ushering him onward. The last time he had visited Tyr, he had tried to come in disguise for all the good it had done him. Anyone who saw the signs would have known he was in the city. Unusual events, banners tying themselves together, men falling from buildings and landing unharmed, were only the beginning. His Taviran effect seemed to be growing more powerful, causing increasingly greater distortions, and more dangerous ones. During his last visit, Tyr had been besieged by rebels, but the city hadn't suffered. Tyr had too much trade to be bothered by something as simple as a siege. Most people had lived as usual, barely acknowledging the rebels. Nobles could play their games as long as they didn't disrupt more honest folks. Besides, everyone had known that the stone would hold, as it almost always had. It might have been rendered obsolete by traveling, but for invaders who didn't have access to the One Power, the stone was virtually impossible to take. In and of itself, it was more massive than many cities. A gargantuan sprawl of walls, towers, and sheer fortifications, without a single seam in its rock. It included forges, warehouses, thousands of defenders, and its own fortified dock. None of that would be much use against an army of Shan-Chan with Damani and Rocken. Crowds lined the street up to the stone verge, the large open space that surrounded the stone on three sides. "It's a killing field," Lews Therin said. Here, another crowd cheered Rand. The gates to the stone were open, and a welcoming delegation awaited him. Darlin, once a High Lord, now King of Tyr, sat astride a brilliant white stallion. Shorter than Rand by at least a head, the tyrant had a short black beard and close-cropped hair. His prominent nose kept him from being handsome, but Rand had found him very keen of mind and of honor. After all, Darlin had opposed Rand from the start, rather than joining those who had hastened to worship him. A man whose allegiance was hard to win was often one whose allegiance would also be secure when he was out of your sight. Darlin bowed to Rand. Pale-faced Dobrain, dressed in a blue coat and white trousers, sat astride a roan gelding beside the king. His expression was unreadable, though Rand suspected he was still disappointed in being sent from Aradaman so soon. Lines of defenders of the stone stood before the wall, swords held before them. Breastplates and ridged helmets shined near to glowing. Their puffy sleeves were striped with black and gold, and above them waved the banner of Tyr, a half-red, half-gold field, marked with 3 silver crescents. Rand could see that the square inside the wall was bursting with soldiers, many in the colors of the defenders, but many wearing no uniform beyond a strap of red and gold tied around their arms. Those would be the new recruits, the men Rand had ordered Darlin to gather. It was a display to produce awe, or perhaps to stroke a man's pride. Rand stopped Tadaishar before Darlin. Unfortunately, the rooster Wyraman accompanied the king, sitting his horse just behind Darlin. Wyraman was so lacking in wits that Rand would barely have trusted him to work a field unsupervised, let alone command a squad of troops. True, the short man was brave, but that was likely only because he was too slow of thought to consider most dangers. As always, Wyraman looked even more the fool for attempting to style himself as anything other than a buffoon. His beard was waxed, his hair was carefully arranged to hide just how much he was balding, and his clothing was rich. A coat and breeches, cut as if to be a field uniform, but no man would wear such fine cloth into battle. No man but Wyraman. I like him, Lews Therin thought. Rand started. You don't like anyone. He's honest, Lews Therin replied, then laughed. More than I am, for certain. A man doesn't choose to be an idiot, but he does choose to be loyal. We could do worse than have this man as a follower. Rand kept his tongue. Arguing with the madman was pointless. Lews Therin made decisions without reason. At least he wasn't humming about a pretty woman again. That could be distracting. Darlin and Dobrain bowed to Rand, Wyraman mimicking them. There were others behind the king, of course. Lady Caroline was a given. The slender Kyrianan was as beautiful as Rand remembered. A white opal hung on her forehead, the golden chain woven into her dark hair. Rand had to force himself to look away. She looked too much like her cousin, Moiraine. Sure enough, Lews Therin started naming off the names on the list, Moiraine at the forefront. Rand steeled himself, listening to the dead man in the back of his mind as he studied the rest of the group. All of the remaining High Lords and Ladies of Tyr were there, atop their own mounts. Simpering Aniala sat her bay horse beside Wyraman. And was she wearing a handkerchief favor bearing his colors? Rand had thought her a little more discriminating than that. Torion had a smile on that lumpy face of his. A pity that he was still alive when far better men among the High Lords had died. Simon, Estanda, Tedosian, Hearn, all 4 had opposed Rand, leading the siege against the stone. Now they bowed to him. Alana was there too. Rand didn't look at her. She was sorrowful, he could tell through their bond. As well she should be. My Lord Dragon, Darlin said, straightening in his saddle. Thank you for sending Dobrain with your wishes. His voice conveyed his displeasure. He had rushed to gather an army at Rand's urgent command, and then Rand had forced him to do nothing for weeks. Well, the men will be glad for the extra weeks of training soon. The army is ready, Darlin continued, hesitant. We are prepared to leave for Aradaman. Rand nodded. He'd originally intended to set Darlin in Aradaman so he could pull Aiel and Ashaman out for placement elsewhere. He turned, glancing back at the crowds, absently realizing why there were so many foreigners among them. Many of the nationals had been recruited for the army, and now stood in ranks inside the stone. Perhaps the people in the square and on the streets hadn't been there to cheer Rand's arrival. Perhaps they thought they were cheering their departing armies off to victory. "You've done well, King Darlin," Rand said. "It's about time someone in Tyr learned to obey orders. I know your men are impatient, but they will have to wait a short time longer. Make rooms for me in the stone and see to quartering Bashir's soldiers in the Aiel." Darlin's confusion deepened. "Very well. Are we not needed in Aradaman then?" "What Aradaman needs, nobody can give," Rand said. "Your forces will be coming with me." "Of course, my lord. And where will we be marching?" "To Shale Ghul."
Chapter 43. Sealed to the Flame. Egwene sat quietly in her tent, hands in her lap. She controlled her shock, her burning anger, and her incredulity. Plump, pretty Chesa sat silently on a cushion in the corner, sewing embroidery on the hem of one of Egwene's dresses, looking as content as a person could be, now that her mistress had returned. The tent was secluded, set in its own grove within the Aes Sedai camp. Egwene had allowed no attendants besides Chesa this morning. She'd even turned away Swan, who had undoubtedly come to offer some kind of apology. Egwene needed time to think, to prepare, to deal with her failure. And it was a failure. Yes, it had been forced on her by others, but those others were her followers and friends. They would know her anger for their part in this fiasco. But first she needed to look inward, to judge what she should have done better. She sat in her wooden chair, high-backed, with scrollwork patterns across the armrests. Her tent was as she had left it, desk orderly, blankets folded, pillows stacked in the corner, obviously kept dusted by Chesa, like a museum used to instruct children of days past. Egwene had been as forceful as possible with Swan during their meetings in Tel Aranriad, and yet they'd still come against her wishes. Perhaps she had been too secretive. It was a danger, secrecy. It was what had pulled down Swan. The woman's time as head of the Blue Aja's eyes and ears had taught her to be parsimonious with information, doling it out like a stingy employer on payday. If the others had known the importance of Swan's work, perhaps they wouldn't have decided to work against her. Egwene ran her fingers along the smooth, tightly woven pouch she wore tied to her belt. Inside was a long, thin item, retrieved secretly from the White Tower earlier in the morning. Had she fallen into the same trap as Swan? It was a danger. She had been trained by Swan, after all. If Egwene had explained in more detail how well her work in the White Tower was going, would the others have stayed their hands? It was a difficult line to walk. There were many secrets that an Amyrlin had to hold. To be transparent would be to lose her edge of authority. But with Swan herself, Egwene should have been more forthcoming. The woman was too accustomed to taking action on her own. The way she had kept that dream Turangreal against the Hall's knowledge and wishes was an indication of that. Yet Egwene had approved of that, unconsciously encouraging Swan to defy authority. Yes, Egwene had made mistakes. She could not lay all the blame on Swan, Bryn, and
Number
Gawain.
2.
She had likely made other mistakes as well. She would need to look at her own actions in more detail later. For now, she turned her attention to a greater problem. Disaster had struck. She'd been pulled from the White Tower on the brink of success. What was to be done? She did not get up and pace in thought. To pace was to show nervousness or frustration, and she had to learn to be reserved at all times, lest she unwittingly fall into bad habits. So she remained seated, arms on the handrests, wearing a fine silken gown of green with yellow patterns on the bodice. How odd it felt to be in that skirt, how wrong. Her white dresses, though forced upon her, had become something of a symbol of defiance. To change now meant an end to her strike. She was tired, emotionally and physically, from the night's battle, but she couldn't give in to that. This wouldn't be her first near sleepless night before a very important day of decisions and problems. She found herself tapping the armrest and forced herself to stop. There was no way she could return to the White Tower as a novice now. Her defiance had worked only because she had been a captive Amerlin. If she went back willingly, she would be seen as subservient or as arrogant. Besides, Elida would certainly have her executed this time. And so she was stuck, just as she had been when she'd first been taken by the White Tower's agents. She gritted her teeth. She'd once thought, mistakenly, that the Amerlin wouldn't be so easily tossed about by random twists in the pattern. She was supposed to be in control. Everyone else spent their days reacting, but the Amerlin was a woman of action. She was realizing more and more that being the Amerlin wasn't different. Life was a tempest, whether you were a milkmaid or a queen. The queens were simply better at projecting control in the middle of that storm. If Egwene looked like a statue unaffected by the winds, it was actually because she saw how to bend with those winds. That gave the illusion of control. No, it was not just an illusion. The Amerlin did have more control, if only because she controlled herself and kept the tempest outside her. She swayed before the needs of the moment, but her actions were well considered. She had to be as logical as a white, as thoughtful as a brown, as passionate as a blue, as decisive as a green, as merciful as a yellow, as diplomatic as a gray, and yes, as vengeful as a red, when necessary. There was no returning to the White Tower as a novice, and she couldn't wait for negotiations. Not with the Shan-Shan bold enough to strike the White Tower, not with Rand completely unwatched, not with the world in chaos and the Shadow gathering its forces for the last battle. That left her with a difficult decision. She had a fresh army of 50,000 troops, and the White Tower had suffered an incredible blow. The Aes Sedai would be exhausted, the Tower Guard broken and wounded. In a few days' time, the healings would be finished, and the women rested. She didn't know if Elida had survived the attack or not, but Egwene had to assume she was still in control. That gave Egwene a very narrow window for action. She knew what the only right decision was. She didn't have time to wait for the sisters in the White Tower to make the right decision. She would have to force them to accept her. She hoped that history would eventually forgive her. She rose, threw open the flaps of her tent, and stopped dead. A man was sitting on the ground directly in front of her. Gawain scrambled to his feet, every bit as handsome as she remembered. He wasn't beautiful like his half-brother. Gawain was more solid, more real. Strikingly, that now made him more attractive to Egwene than Galad. Galad was like a being from beyond reality, a figure of legends and stories. He was like a glass statue to be placed on a table for admiration, but never touched. Gawain was different. Handsome, with that brilliant reddish gold hair and those tender eyes. While Galad never worried about anything, Gawain's concern made him genuine, as did his ability to make mistakes, unfortunately. "Egwene," he said, righting his sword and dusting off his trouser legs. Light. Had he slept there in front of her tent? The sun was already halfway to its zenith. The man should have gone to take some rest. Egwene squelched her concern and worry for him. It was not time to be a lovesick girl. It was time to be Amerlin. "Gawain," she said, raising a hand, stopping him as he stepped toward her. "I haven't begun to think about what to do with you. Other matters demand my attention. Has the hall gathered as I requested?" "I think so," he said, turning to glance toward the center of camp. She could just barely make out the large gathering tent at the hall through the scrub trees. "Then I must appear before them," Egwene said, taking a deep breath. She began to walk forward. "No," Gawain said, stepping in front of her. "Egwene, we need to talk." "Later." "No, not later, burn it. I've waited months. I need to know how we stand. I need to know if you—" "Stop," she said. He froze. She would not be taken in by those eyes. Burn him? Not right now. I said that I hadn't sorted through my feelings yet, she said coolly. And I meant it. He set his jaw. I don't believe that Aes Sedai calmness, Egwene, he said. Not when your eyes are so much more truthful. I've sacrificed. You've sacrificed, Egwene interrupted, letting a little anger show. What about what I sacrificed to rebuild the White Tower? Sacrifices that you undermined by acting against my express wishes. Did Swan not tell you that I had forbidden a rescue? She did, he said stiffly. But we were worried about you. Well, that worry was the sacrifice I demanded, Gawain, she said, exasperated. Don't you see what a distrust you have shown me? How can I trust you if you will disobey me in order to feel more comfortable? Gawain didn't look ashamed. He just looked perturbed. That was actually a good sign. As Amerlin, she needed a man who would speak his mind. In private. But in public, she'd need someone who supported her. Couldn't he see that? You love me, Egwene, he said stubbornly. I can see it. Egwene, the woman loves you, she said. But Egwene the Amerlin is furious with you. Gawain, if you'd be with me, you'd have to be with both the woman and the Amerlin. I would expect you, a man who was trained to be first prince of the sword, to understand that distinction. Gawain looked away. You don't believe it, do you? She asked. What? That I'm Amerlin, she said. You don't accept my title. I'm trying to, he said as he looked back at her. But bloody ashes, Egwene. When we parted, you were just an accepted, and that wasn't so long ago. Now they've named you Amerlin? I don't know what to think. And you can't see how your uncertainty undermines anything we could have together? I can change, but you have to help me. Which is why I wanted to talk later, she said. Are you going to let me pass? He stepped aside with obvious reluctance. We're not finished with this talk, he warned. I've finally made up my mind about something, and I don't intend to stop chasing it until I have it. Fine, Egwene said, passing him. I can't think about that now. I have to go order people I care about to slaughter another group of people I care about. You'll do it then? Gawain said from behind. There's speculation in camp. I heard it, though I barely left this place all morning. Some think you'll command Bryn to assault the city. She hesitated. It would be a shame if it happened, he said. I don't care a whit about Tar Valon, but I think I know what it would do to you to attack it. She turned back to him. I will do what must be done, Gawain, she said, meeting his eyes. For the good of the Aes Sedai and the White Tower, even if it is painful, even if it tears me apart inside, I will do it if it needs to be done. Always. He nodded slowly. She headed for the pavilion at the center of camp.
Bienvenidos a Audible. Penguin Random House Grupo Editorial.
One second, I gotta get back to where I was. There we go.
This was your fault, Jessie, Adalorna said. Her eyes were still red. She'd lost a warder the night before. She was one of many, but she was also tough as a feral hound, and was obviously determined not to let her pain show. Jessie Bilal warmed her hands on her cup of gooseberry tea, refusing to let herself be goaded. Adalorna's question had been inevitable, and perhaps Jessie deserved the reprimand. Of course, they all deserved it in one way or another, except perhaps for Tsutama, who hadn't been an Aja head at the time. That was part of why the woman hadn't been invited to this particular meeting. That, and the fact that the Red Aja wasn't in good favor with the others at the moment. The small, cramped room was barely large enough for 5 chairs, and the small, pot-bellied stove at the wall, radiating a calm warmth. There wasn't room for a table, let alone a hearth. Just enough space for 5 women, the most powerful women in the world, and the 5 most foolish, it seemed. They were a sorry sisterhood this morning, the morning following the greatest disaster in the history of the White Tower. Jessie glanced at the woman beside her, Farana Neharan, first reasoner of the White, was a small, stout woman who, oddly in a white, often seemed more temper than logic. Today was one of those times. She sat scowling, her arms folded. She'd refused a cup of tea. Next to her was Suana Dragand, first weaver of the Yellow Aja. She was a lanky thing, all bones and skin, but had an unyielding demeanor. Adalorna, the one to make the accusation against Jessie, was beside her. Who could blame the Captain General for her spitefulness? She who had been birched by Elida, and who had last night suffered near death at the hands of the Shonshan. The slim woman looked uncharacteristically disheveled. Her hair was pulled back in a serviceable bun, and her pale dress was wrinkled. The last woman in the room was Sarancha Colveen, head clerk of the Grey Aja. She had light brown hair and a pinched face. She looked perpetually as if she'd tasted something very sour. The trait seemed more manifest today than usual. She has a point, Jessie, Farana said, her logical tone a contrast with her obvious pique. You were the one to suggest this course of action. Suggest is a strong word. Jessie took a sip of her drink. I simply mentioned that in some of the more private tower records,
There we go.
there are accounts of times when the Aja heads ruled instead of the Amalek. The 13th depository was known to the Aja heads, though they could not visit it unless they were also sitters. That didn't stop most of them from sending sitters to gather information from it for them. I may have been the messenger, but that is often the role of the Brown. You all were not so hesitant as to be forced into this course of action. There were a few sideways glances at that, and the women found opportunity to study their tea. Yes, they were all implicated, and they understood it. Jessie would not take the blame for this disaster. There is little use in assigning blame. Suana attempted to be soothing, though her voice was laced with bitterness. I won't be deflected so easily, Adalorna growled. Some reacted to the loss of a warder with sadness, others with anger. There was little doubt which was Adalorna's way. A grave, grave error has been made. The White Tower burns, the Amerlin has been captured by invaders, and the Dragon Reborn still walks the earth, unfettered. The entire world will soon know of our disgrace. And what good will it do to blame one another? Suana replied. Are we so childish that we will spend this meeting squabbling about which one of us will hang in a useless attempt to evade our responsibility? Jessie gave quiet thanks for the bony yellow's words. Of course, Suana had been the first of the Aja heads to agree to Jessie's plan, so she'd be next in line for the metaphorical hanging. She has a point. Sarancha took a sip of her tea. We must make peace among ourselves. The tower needs leadership, and we're not going to get it from the hall. That's partly our fault as well, Farana admitted, looking sick. It was. It had seemed like a brilliant plan. The division of the tower, the departure of so many in rebellion, and the raising of a new Amelin had not been their fault, but it had presented several opportunities. The first had been the easiest to take hold of. Send sitters to the rebels to steer them and hasten a reconciliation. The most youthful of sitters had been chosen. Their replacements in the tower intended to serve only a short time. The Aja heads had been certain this ripple of a rebellion could be easily smoothed over. They hadn't taken it seriously enough. That had been their first mistake. The second was more dire. There were indeed times in the past where the Aja heads, not the Amelin seat or the hall of the tower, had led the Aes Sedai. It had been done secretly, of course, but it had been very successful. Why, the reign of Samaila Sorenthane would have been a complete disaster if the Aja heads hadn't stepped in. This had seemed like a similar occasion. The days of the last battle's approach were a special time, requiring special attention. Attention from women of sound, rational minds and great experience. Women who could speak together in confidence and decide on the best course, avoiding the arguments that the hall got into. Where did we go wrong? You think? Sarancha asked quietly. The women fell silent. None of them wanted to admit outright that the plan had backfired. Adalorna settled back in her chair, arms folded, smoldering but no longer flinging out accusations. It was Elida, Farana said. She wasn't ever very logical. She was a bloody disaster is what she was, Adalorna muttered. It was more than that, Jessie admitted. Directly choosing sitters we could control to replace those sent to the rebels was a good decision, but perhaps too obvious. The women of our own Ajas became suspicious. I know of several comments made by women of the Brown. We are not so oblivious as others would like to think us. Sarancha nodded. It smelled of conspiracy, she said. That made the women less trusting. And then there were the rebels. Far more difficult to control than presumed. The women nodded. They, like Jessie, had assumed that with proper direction, the rebels would find their way back to the tower and ask forgiveness. This division should have ended with no more damage than a few bruised egos. But they hadn't counted on how resilient or effective the rebels would be. A full army appearing on the shores around Tarvalin in the middle of a snowstorm, led by one of the greatest military minds of the age, with a new Amerlin and a frustratingly effective siege. Who could have expected it? And some of the sitters they had sent had begun siding with the rebels more than the White Tower. We never should have let Elida disband the Blue Aja, Jessie thought. The Blues might have been willing to come back had it not happened, but it was such a dishonor that they dug in. Light only knew how dangerous that was. The histories were filled with accounts of how dogged the Blues could be at getting their way, particularly when they were forced into a corner. I think it is time to admit that there is no hope to save our plans, Suana said. Are we agreed? Agreed, Adalorna said. One by one, the sisters nodded their heads, and so did Jessie herself. Even in this room, it was difficult to admit fault, but it was time to cut their losses and begin rebuilding. This has its own problems, Sarancha said, voice more calm now. The other women looked more assured as well. They didn't trust one another, these 5, but they were far closer to doing so than any other group with any authority in the hall. Care must be taken, Farana added. The division must be mended. The rebellion was against Elida.
Right, the rebels are here.
If she is no longer Amerlin, then what is there to rebel against? So, we abandon her? Jessie asked. She deserves it, Adalorna said. She said time and time again that Shan-Chen were no threat. Well, now she is paying for her foolishness firsthand. Elida is beyond rescue, Farana added. The Hall has already discussed this. The Amerlin is buried somewhere in a mass of Shan-Shan captives, and we have neither the resources nor the information for a rescue. Not to mention our total lack of desire, Jessie added to herself. Many of the sitters who had brought these points before the Hall were ones who had been sent to penance by Elida. Jessie wasn't one of those, but she did agree that Elida had earned her reward, if only for the way she had driven the Ajas to one another's throats. Then we need a replacement, Sarancha said. But who? It has to be someone strong, Suana said, but someone cautious, unlike Elida. Someone whom the sisters can rally around. What about Sayer and Asnabar? Jessie asked. She has shown uncanny wisdom of late, and she is well liked. Of course you choose a Brown, Adalorna said. And why not? Jessie said, taken aback. You all heard, I think, how well she did assuming command during...
All right, everyone. I'm going to call a little early tonight. I'm a little hurting and a little tired. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by. I appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe.